Would you rather have a teacher when you're learning something new that's just done the bare minimum a long time ago? Or would you rather have a teacher who's not only kept up with continuing education, but also been through supervision so that there's someone who's directly observed and worked with them to be the best teacher they can be? Well, for me, it's the latter, and I think it should be for you too. Hi, I'm Ted Meissner. I'm a teacher of mindfulness, and welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. It's good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. And if you're new to this podcast, I ask that you subscribe or share if this is interesting to you, because it's helping other people find this podcast too. Today, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Alison Evans about the importance and need for supervision in mindfulness. Our guest today is Dr. Alison Evans. Alison, good to see you again. Thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Thank you, Ted. It's a pleasure to be here.
And it's a really wonderful, wonderful chance this week. We happen to see each other a couple of times for this and also for a sick group. So for those of you who are watching this or listening to this, we'll have another episode to explain a little bit more about that. But for right now, Alison, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your work in mindfulness. Maybe what one of the first things was that brought you to mindfulness.
Sure, yeah. So it was some years ago now, back sort of 2004. I was working as a psychological therapist in the health service in the UK. I was originally trained as an occupational therapist, and mindfulness was just coming about.
Yeah.
And my supervisor mentioned something. She'd been on a day workshop, and I'd always loved yoga, and something about it just pricked my interest. And I said, "Oh, that sounds interesting." And so it kind of went a little bit from there. And then, yeah, there was a research trial happening at Exeter. So I got this opportunity to begin. So yeah, it was kind of just in a way, just this chance conversation in my CBT supervision, actually, that
Mm-hmm.
really sparked it off. Yeah.
Okay. And how about these days? Tell us a little bit more about where is
Yeah.
Alison Evans with mindfulness today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So mindfulness quite quickly became all of my work. So gradually, more and more, and a combination of teaching, training, and supervising.
Mm-hmm.
And the supervision's the bit that's, yeah, maybe I should say a little bit more about particularly.
Yeah, that's your
Yeah.
focus. How did that happen? That
Yeah.
was what I wanted
Yeah.
to hear about.
Yeah. So that happened back when I started training other people. Now, actually, if I go back further, when I began to teach, supervision felt like a really big part of how I learned mindfulness, how I learned to teach. Really great supervisors, a range of supervisors. So immediately, this felt, important. And then when I began to train others, I started to see, oh yes, training's one thing, but there's a gap. People
Yeah.
need something else. People need some sort of hand holding in this, place to ask questions. So interest sort of sparked, and then kept getting interested. We needed to find supervisors. And then for my master's research, I concentrated on supervision. So kind of dived deeper and deeper into supervision.
Yeah.
And then I've been training other people as supervisors, and supervising other people, supervising supervisors. So just gradually, not just mindfulness has become all my work, but in many ways, mindfulness supervision has, yeah, really become my work.
Yeah. And you raise an interesting distinction that many of us might not have even considered is that training is a different thing than supervision. You
Yeah,
might go through training to become a teacher, but there's more to it than that. So
yeah,
maybe it'd be helpful if you say a little bit about what is mindfulness-based supervision.
yeah, sure, yeah. So, um, hard to find a quick answer, I think, for this.
Take
Yeah,
your time.
yeah. So it it has many similarities with other supervisions. People might be familiar with supervision in other contexts, um, and it has some nuances, some differences. So one big area I would say is it really supports teachers to learn. So this learning aspect of supervision. So it helps them to learn. Um, what to teach, how do I do it? It really helps them to do that in a mindful way. So this term we use about embodiment, so how to teach in an embodied way, it really supports them with understanding why. So there's all these different aspects. And then I really think that the whole sort of piece around embodiment is so important. So in many ways, we learn embodiment through practice and often through being in supervision with another. It's a bit like we're practicing embodied conversation with each other. So you really got this chance in supervision to embody mindfulness, practice, have a go at teaching, get some feedback, and have someone else who's in the field with a lot of experience can really help to guide you and hold you and have an oversight of your work. Keep you in check in a way.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting aspect of how this is different in supervision and perhaps some other professions where you go through training as a teacher, a professional in whatever the field happens to be, and you have the knowledge, go forth. It is an intellectual thing and maybe not as much of a practice thing.
Yeah.
And here we have this thing we may characterize as embodiment, or several different ways we might look at it, that it might show up, that requires an ongoing practice and refreshing and training. It seems very similar to being maybe a physical trainer, where you don't just go through your educational components, you also continue to physically take care of your body as a model for those that you're working with.
Yeah, I would agree. And we have this, what we call inquiry within teaching. And it's so much part of supervision. And it's not just about questions and answers,
Right.
Mindful supervision is really this inquiry that requires us to sort of inquire, with all of our body, all of our being, to reflect, to ponder, to not know. And we do that in the presence of another. And, something gets created, you just asked me a question there, check what's happening, consider what's coming up. I see something that lands with you, you come back to me. So it's really this sense of, how we can be embodied in relationship with another, and then what can come from that, the unknown.
Yeah, and that continued exploration of what's here, which sometimes is a shared thing. We may have very similar feelings or responses to particular conditions in our external or internal environment. And there's respecting the uniqueness of, what is this like for you? What are you finding? And respecting that in relationship, which we'll have an entirely separate episodes, probably many on inquiry. But this brings up the importance of why supervision is so important. And I wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
Yes. So I think many things, and I think there will be some very particular things when teachers are new, and maybe some things, other things when people have been teaching for quite a long while. One is, I think there is so many layers and nuances to teaching mindfulness, that it takes a long while to discover that. And supervision is one place that you can really explore that. So all of the questions, all of the deepening of understanding of why it is we're teaching what we're doing. But I also think this whole point around sort of making it your own. So finding your own way to be a mindfulness teacher that's authentic, that, stays true to what mindfulness is, to the sort of lineage, but also has, you in it. So part of being mindful is that we bring ourselves to it. So we're not pretending to be someone else. So I think there's loads and loads to explore. And I just think so many mindfulness teachers are teaching on their own. And supervision is, for me, it's this bit, it's a bit a way of sort of checks and balances. in a very friendly, compassionate way. But there's someone else that looks at your work. You can be really show yourself to them. You can really show all your vulnerabilities. You can ask all the questions, but you can get some really honest feedback. You can be asked challenging questions. So you're continually learning and, keeping the standards high for mindfulness teaching.
Yeah, and that's an interesting part of it is that so many teachers of mindfulness programs, and there are lots of programs out there,
Mm,
will go through a teacher training program that may take years. It certainly
yeah,
did
yeah,
for me in
yeah,
MESR, and I know as for you as well, and many other
yeah,
senior teachers. And for I suspect most, at least where I am, it seems, will go through the teacher training. You're now
yeah,
blessed. You've received the accomplishment. You can now
yeah,
teach. But at least here, there isn't quite the follow-up or the built-in aspect of having ongoing supervision,
yeah,
continuing
yeah,
education, that kind of thing. So there are many teachers out there who haven't continued with their
yes,
training. They have a
yeah,
personal practice, and they may be terrific teachers,
mm,
but there can also be over time, kind of stray from what
yeah,
we're doing and maybe inadvertently introduce things that are a little bit off from
yeah,
the
yeah,
direction we're going in because there is an underlying intention
yeah,
to what we're doing with mindfulness programs. And so I think supervision is really helpful to keep us honest, keep us pointing to
yeah,
true north, because magnetic north is going to keep pulling us off
yeah,
in a
yeah,
different direction.
yeah. And I also think things change
Yeah,
as well. So, I've heard supervisors recently saying this, that without supervision, um, they wouldn't have kept up. So they did their
right.
training 10 years ago. So now, for instance, there's a lot more emphasis on trauma sensitivity within teaching mindfulness.
Exactly.
Well, if you've just stayed with your training 10 years ago, you've maybe kind of missed all that piece.
Right.
So there's something about, keeping us up to date,
Yeah.
that's really important.
Yeah. And there's always new research and there's always new
Yeah,
layers of ourselves to explore. This is one of the tremendous
yeah,
benefits that I've found with peer supervision is the depth to which being in a group of other senior teachers where
yeah,
we do inquiry with each other
yeah,
is not just keeping us to true north and what are we doing with the intention of our
yeah,
programs, but that deep exploration of our own responses to what's here that
yeah,
otherwise might have been missed, but we get a helping hand in that
yeah,
connection and that space with others.
yeah. And also this keeping it alive. So, that's the other danger when we do something, fairly frequently, is that we get a little stale with it. So for me, supervision just helps keeps a liveliness as well as with
Right.
that sort of questioning and wondering.
Mhm.
Mm,
So adding into this, and maybe this is coming, I hope, more and more obvious to those who are watching and
mm,
listening this, is that there's a lot there. There are many different layers
mm,
to supervision. And that itself indicates there's an importance in training to be a supervisor, that it's not
yeah,
just something like, now you're a supervisor. You see
yeah,
this happen in the corporate world where people climb the ladder and
mm,
end up in positions where there wasn't adequate training to do that kind of role.
mm,
Being a mindfulness supervisor is a
yeah,
role. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about training to be a
yes,
supervisor.
yeah, sure, yeah. So over years, one of the things myself and colleagues have done is we've developed a framework for supervision. So it came out of my MSc research. So we're starting to see from expert supervisors what was happening and came to describe it, and developed a training around that. And what's happened is that was way back, it was like a 1 day training, then it was a 2 day training, then it was a 3 day based training. So it's a little bit like when you unpeel the layers of the onion, you sort of see the complexity.
Mhm.
And it was like, okay, 3 days is sort of bare minimum. And really, before that, people need to be experienced teachers,
Right.
really need to know programs, need to know mindfulness well for themselves. And then from that 3 days, we've also developed it more over recent years. So people were doing that 3 days and saying, this is great, gets me started. And, something else is needed. The one important bit is the supervision of supervision, which we've called supervision. So
Yeah.
again, if supervision's important, it's important when you're a supervisor too.
Yeah.
And then exploring this more from a practice-based place. So exploring what it is to be a supervisor through a retreat. So again, having this model, but really coming to the fundamental of practice and embodiment. And then we've developed a second layer where we look a little bit more at supervising in groups as well as one-to-one, and your personal development as a supervisor.
Right.
So really just looking at these stages of learning and this seamless model of continuing development as a supervisor in the same way that we do as a teacher.
Yeah, and two very different things, having this as one-on-one supervision,
Yeah,
group supervision, and is it just with a couple of people or a larger group?
yeah,
How you relate and the experiences that those people have in those
yeah,
supervision sessions
yeah,
are also very, very unique and different
yeah,
and require some training and practice.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
mentioned the word earlier about standards,
Mm,
good practices. I'm wondering if you could unpack that one a little bit too.
yeah, yes. So, yeah, standards, good practice, guidelines, I think there are many ways. I think in many ways we sort of hold the ethics of teaching and supervision. One is as a teacher, as a supervisor, sort of our own ethical framework, how we hold that through our own internal inquiry. And I think there's something around external frameworks that also support us and others to have standards. So both are sort of needed. And in the UK context, we've got an association that some time ago started to set guidelines for teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and then has guidelines for trainers and guidelines for supervisors. Um, and I really think, for me, this is fantastic that it's kind of got guidelines for these different layers of
Right.
and different roles that we might have. And they're really quite specific. And the supervisor's one has got it's a long list of guidelines. And for me, I think it's important how we use those. But for me, it's quite reassuring to have that. So it's a little bit like, okay, there are these guidelines here. If I go to mindfulness supervisor, I would like to know that actually they've got this degree of competence, these skills, these ways of being. And I think for the public to know that mindfulness teachers fit these guidelines, that they do have supervision, that someone is overseeing their work, that they've been trained by a credible training organization. So for me, I think if we think about the people that come to mindfulness classes, I hope this is very reassuring for people that there are these standards around. And I find them quite a good way myself of just looking every so often and just thinking, oh yeah, where am I on this?
Yeah.
Anything that needs a bit of a brush up, anything else that's needed. So for me, guidelines and standards are great. And I'm noticing, I spoke about the UK, other organisations,
Yeah.
other countries are developing standards and guidelines with a lot of similarity across the world, which is good to be seeing as well. Some sort of consensus about what good practice looks like and feels like.
Yeah, this is one of the interesting facets of where we are these days
Mm,
with mindfulness is in the basically 40 years of these kinds of formalized programs that there is not a world standard on this,
yeah,
that at least in many countries there's not licensure. So we don't have the same sort of standards and ethics and the rest that other professions may have.
yeah,
But that doesn't mean that they're not standards,
yeah,
guidelines, and some idea of, is the person who's offering this class someone who has been through what you're describing and
mm,
continues with their own education and supervision and supervision and all the rest
yeah,
of it? Or did they go to a weekend thing and they got a certificate?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now there's a difference there in what you might find.
Yeah.
And for those new teachers, it's not something against them. It's that we might not know
Yeah.
early
Yeah.
on in our teaching career some of the things that we're doing that might not be as supportive of participants. And having
Mm.
these standards and these guidelines and these ethics are to help elevate our
Yeah.
teaching. And it takes some time and takes some
Yeah.
practice.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of never ends,
Right.
there's that sense of it, yeah, it keeps going. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, Alison,
Mhm.
is there anything else that you'd like to share insights with listeners just about our topic of supervision today?
Yeah, I was wondering if I'd given enough of a flavor of what mindfulness supervision is. Yeah, so I was just, in a way, I was thinking, yeah, maybe just a weeny bit more on that. So, yeah, what it might include is it might include
Mhm.
beginning with a little bit of practice, which really is sort of setting that tone that we're interested in, the body and what's happening, all the internal processes in supervision. So it's a conversation, but it's very much coming from that place. Um, we might have little moments where we pause, and again we just check in what's happening, thoughts, feelings, body. We might have times that we watch little bits of somebody's teaching through video, or they teach live. We give, some feedback. We've got this tool in the mindfulness field called the mindfulness-based interventions
Yep.
teaching assessment criteria, which might be a whole other
It
interview
will.
that's go
I
on
was
that.
just thinking about asking Becca to come
Yeah,
on and
yeah.
talk about
So,
that.
it kind of sets out the domains of teaching and helps people to sort of identify strengths, learning needs. So that might be part of supervision. People might be bringing in, their own practice, really inquiring around their own practice, making links with how that fits with teaching, how they're bringing mindfulness into their life. Might well be talking about the context that they teach in, the sort of challenges around that. Might be talking around how to be more inclusive in their groups, how to, reach more diverse populations. So all of these different aspects are sort of held within this container that really is sort of imbued with compassion and kindness and real mindful attention. So yeah, I wasn't sure I described it quite enough. So I hope that gives some flavour for
Yeah,
listeners.
yeah. I think so, because there's so many different ways in which supervision might show up. It
Yes,
can be
yes,
co-teaching with a new teacher, as
yes,
well as, of course, your one-on-one sessions with them there.
yeah,
It might be a peer group
yes,
where a completely different format may be
yes,
used based
yes,
on one particular MBI. It may be
yes,
based on, no, this is just a particular practice, or
yeah,
the different topics, as we mentioned in our sit group, lots of different topics that
yes,
we can
yes,
explore together
yes,
too. So
yes,
we'll never be bored. Alison,
yes,
we will never be
yes,
bored.
yes, yeah.
Well, for those who
And
are listening, I will be including several links in the spot where links are found for these particular offerings. And I just want to thank you, Alison, for your time today so much. I really appreciate you exploring this topic, of which you're one of the people I certainly look to as an expert in this field of supervision with mindfulness. So thank you so much for being here.
thank you, Ted. Thanks for inviting me along. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and I hope you got something of value in today's episode. We're going to have more explorations of this topic around teacher training and supervision, and, well, lots to come. So, until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time.